The Second Battle of Algeciras takes place just a few days after the mostly indecisive first action. After the first battle, a powerful combined squadron of French and Spanish ships makes its way south and east from Cadiz to Algeciras for support. On the British side, Captain Richard Keats leads the ship of the line Superb, the frigate Thames, and the brig Pasley along the same path to Gibraltar. After several days of refitting and repairs, the Franco-Spanish squadron sets sail back to Cadiz through the Strait of Gibraltar, with the British in pursuit. Jack and Stephen, still awaiting trial for the loss of the Sophie, can only observe the ensuing battle from the Rock of Gibraltar. However, Jack later recounts the details of the battle as described by Heneage Dundas of the returning Calpe. So I've made my best attempt at interweaving their first-hand observations of the battle with the second-hand account Jack gives a couple days later. I used a slight echo as an auditory cue for the lines from the second-hand account, and hopefully that makes it a little easier to follow. Most of the video, though, follows Jack's observation of the preparations being made for battle on both sides of the bay. And the scene begins as he and William Babington catch sight of the first ships approaching from the west.
"Sir! Sir!" cried Babington, tearing up the slope, scarlet with hailing and climbing. "Look at the brig, sir! Look over the point!" The brig was the Pasley. They knew her at once, the hired brig Pasley, a fine sailor, and she was crowding sail on the brisk northwest breeze, fit to carry everything away. "Have a look, sir," said Babington, collapsing on the grass in a singularly undisciplined manner and handing up a little brass spyglass. The tube only magnified weakly, but at once the signal flying from the Pasley's masthead leapt out clear and plain. "Enemy in sight." "And there they are, sir," said Babington, pointing to a glimmer of topsails over the dark curve of the land beyond the end of the gut. "Come on!" cried Jack, and began labouring up the hill, gasping and moaning, running as fast as he could for the tower, the highest point on the rock. There were some masons up there working on the building, an officer of the garrison artillery with a splendid great telescope, and some other soldiers. The gunner very civilly offered Jack his glass. Jack leant it on Babington's shoulder, focused carefully, gazed and said, "There's the Superb and the Thames. Then 2 Spanish 3-deckers. One's the Real Carlos, I'm almost sure. Vice Admiral's flagship in any event. 2 74s. No, a 74 and probably an 80-gun ship." "Argonauta," said one of the masons. "Another 3-decker and 3 frigates, 2 French." They sat there, silently watching the steady, calm procession. The Superb and the Thames keeping their stations just a mile ahead of the combined squadron as they came up the gut, and the huge, beautiful Spanish first-rates moving along with the inevitability of the sun. The masons went off to their dinner. The wind backed westerly. The shadow of the tower swept through 25 degrees. When they had rounded Cabrita Point, the Superb and the frigate carried straight on for Gibraltar, while the Spaniards hauled their wind for Algeciras. And now Jack could see that their flagship was indeed the Real Carlos, of 112 guns, one of the most powerful ships afloat, that one of the other 3-deckers was of the same force, and the third of 96. It was a most formidable squadron. 474 great guns, without counting the 100-odd of the frigates, and the ships were surprisingly well handled. They anchored over there under the guns of the Spanish batteries as trimly as though they were to be reviewed by the king. "Hello, sir," said Mowat. "I thought you'd be up here. I've brought you a cake." "Why, thanky," cried Jack. "I'm devilish hungry, I find." He at once cut a slice and ate it up. How extraordinarily the Navy had changed, he thought, cutting another. When he was a midshipman, it would never in 1,000 years have occurred to him to speak to his captain, far less bring him cakes. and if it had occurred to him, he would never have done so for fear of his life. "May I share your rock, sir?" asked Mowat, sitting down. "They've come to fetch the Frenchmen out, I do suppose. Do you think we shall go for 'em, sir?" "Pompey'll never be fit for sea these 3 weeks," said Jack dubiously. "Caesar's cruelly knocked about and must get all her new masts in. But even if they can get her ready before the enemy sail, that only gives us 5 of the line against 10, or 9 if you leave the Hannibal out. 376 guns to their 700-odd, both their squadrons combined. We're short-handed, too." "You'd go for them, would you not, sir?" said Babington, and both the midshipmen laughed very cheerfully. Jack gave a jerk of his head, and Mowat said, "As when enclosing harpooners assail, in Hyperborean seas the slumbering whale." What huge things these Spaniards are! "The Caesars have petitioned to be allowed to work all day and night, sir. Captain Brenton says they may work all day but only watch and watch at night. They're piling up juniper wood fires on the mole to have light." The next day, under the lee of the Charles V wall, with his telescope resting on a stone, and with a certain sense of spying or eavesdropping, he watched the Caesar, no longer the flagship, being eased alongside the sheer hulk to receive her new lower mainmast, 100 feet long and more than a yard across. She got it in so quickly that the top was over before noon, and neither it nor the deck could be seen for the number of men working on the rigging. The day after that, still from his melancholy height, full of guilt and his idleness, and the intense ordered busyness below, particularly about the Caesar, he saw the San Antonio, a French 74 that had been delayed, come in from Cadiz and anchor among her friends at Algeciras. The next day there was great activity on the far side of the bay, boats plying to and fro among the 12 ships of the combined fleet, new sails bending, supplies coming aboard, hoist after hoist of signals aboard the flagships. And all this activity was reproduced in Gibraltar, with even greater zeal. There was no hope for the Pompey, but the Audacious was almost entirely ready, while the Venerable, the Spencer, and of course the Superb were in fighting trim, and the Caesar was so near the final stages of her refitting that it was just possible she might be fit for sea in 24 hours. During the night, a hint of a levanter began to breathe from the east. This was the wind the Spaniards were praying for, the wind that would carry them straight out of the gut once they had weathered Cabrita Point, and waft them up to Cadiz. At noon, the first of their 3-deckers loosed her foretopsail and began to move out of the crowded road. Then the others followed her. They were weighing and coming out at intervals of 10 minutes or a quarter of an hour to their rendezvous off Cabrita Point. The Caesar was still tied up alongside the mole, taking in her powder and shot, with officers, men, civilians, and garrison soldiers working with silent, concentrated earnestness. At length, the whole of the combined fleet was under way. Even their jury-rigged capture, the Hannibal, towed by the French frigate Indienne, was creeping out to the point. And now the shrill, squeaking fife and fiddle broke out aboard the Caesar, as her people manned the capstan bars and began to warp her out of the mole, taut, trim, and ready for war. A thundering cheer ran all along the crowded shore from the batteries, walls, and hillside black with spectators. And when it died away, there was the garrison band playing "Come Cheer Up, My Lads, 'Tis to Glory We Steer," as loud as ever they could go, while the Caesar's marines answered with Britain's strike home. Through the cacophony the fife could still be heard. It was most poignantly moving. As the Caesar passed under the stern of the Audacious, she hoisted Sir James's flag once more, and immediately afterwards heaved out the signal "Weigh and prepare for battle." The execution of this was perhaps the most beautiful naval manoeuvre Jack had ever seen. They had all been waiting for the signal. They were all waiting and ready with their cables up and down, and in an unbelievably short space of time the anchors were catted, and the masts and yards broke out in tall white pyramids of sail as the Squadron, 5 ships of the line, 2 frigates, a sloop and a brig, moved out of the lee of the rock and formed in line ahead on the larboard tack. Jack pushed his way out of the tight-packed crowd on the Milehead, and he was halfway to the hospital, meaning to persuade Stephen to mount the rock with him, when he saw his friend running swiftly through the deserted streets. "Has she got out of the mole?" cried Stephen at a considerable distance. "Has the battle begun?" Reassured, he said, "I wouldn't have missed it for £100. That damn fellow in Ward B and his untimely fancies. A fine time to cut one's throat, good lack-a-day." "There's no hurry. No one will touch a gun for hours," said Jack. "But I'm sorry you didn't see the Caesar warping out. It was a glorious sight." "Come up the hill with me and you'll have a perfect view of both squadrons. Do come. I'll call in at the house and pick up a couple of telescopes. And a cloak, it grows cold at night." "Very well," said Stephen after a moment's thought. "I can leave a note, and we will fill our pockets with ham. Then we shall have none of your wry looks and short answers." There they lay, said Jack, pausing for breath again, still on the larboard tack. "I see them perfectly well," said Stephen, 100 yards ahead and climbing fast. "Pray do not stop so often. Come on." "Oh, Lord," said Jack at last, sinking under his familiar rock. "How quick you go. Well, there they are. Aye, there they are. A noble spectacle indeed. But why are they standing over towards Africa? And why only courses and topsails with this light breeze? That one's even backing her main topsail. She's the Superb. She does so to keep her station and not overrun the Admiral, for she's a superb sailor, you know, the best in the fleet." "Did you hear that?" "Yes. It was rather clever, I thought. Witty. Why do they not make sail and bear up?" "Oh, there's no question of a head-on encounter, probably no action at all by daylight. It would be downright madness to attack their line of battle at this time. The Admiral wants the enemy to get out of the bay and into the gut, so there will be no doubling back, and so that he'll have sea room to make a dash at them. Once they get well into the offing, I dare say he'll try to cut off their rear if this wind holds, and it looks like a true 3-day Levanter. Look there, the Hannibal cannot weather the point, do you see? She'll be on shore directly. The frigate's making sad work of it. They're towing her head round. Handsomely does it. There we are. She fills. Set the jib, man. Just so. She's going back." They sat watching in silence, and all around them they could hear other groups, scattered all over the surface of the rock. Remarks about the strengthening of the wind, the probable strategy to be observed, the exact broadside weight of metal on either side, the high standard of French gunnery, the currents to be met with off Cape Trafalgar. With a good deal of backing and filling, the combined fleet, now 9 ships of the line and 3 frigates, had formed their line of battle, with the 2 great Spanish first-rates in the rear, and now they bore away due westwards before the freshening breeze. A little before this, the British squadron had worn together by signal, and now they were on the starboard tack under easy sail. Jack's telescope was firmly on the flagship, and as soon as he saw the hoist running up, he murmured, "Here we go." The signal appeared. At once, the press of canvas almost doubled, and within a few minutes the squadron was racing away after the French and the Spaniards, dwindling, in his view, growing smaller every moment as he watched. "Oh, God, how I wish I were with them," said Jack, with a groan of something like despair. And some 10 minutes later, "Look! There's Superb going ahead. The Admiral must have hailed her." The Superb's topgallant studding sails appeared as though by magic, port and starboard. "How she flies," said Jack, lowering his glass and wiping it. But the dimness was neither his tears nor any dirt on the glass. It was the fading of the day. Down below, it had already gone. A tawny late evening filled the town, and lights were breaking out all over it. Presently lanterns could be seen creeping up the rock to the high points from which perhaps the battle might be seen. And over the water Algeciras began to twinkle, a low-lying curve of lights. "What do you say to some of that ham?" said Jack. That noble fellow Keats, you remember how we saw him shoot ahead, came up with their rear, the two Spanish first-rates, just before midnight. He chose his moment, clapped his helm alee, and dashed between them, firing both broadsides, a 74 taking on two first-rates. "Oh!" cried Stephen. But what he had to say was never heard, for away on the horizon towards Tangiers there was a flash, 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 not unlike the repeated dart of lightning. They leapt to their feet and cupped their ears to the wind to catch the distant roar, but the wind was too strong, and presently they sat down again, fixing the western sea with their telescopes. He shot straight on, leaving his smoke cloud between them as thick as pea soup, and each, firing into it, hit the other. And so the Real Carlos and the Hermenegildo went for each other like fury in the dark. Someone, the Superb or the Hermenegildo, had knocked away the Real Carlos foretopmast, and it was her topsail that fell over the guns and took fire. They could distinctly make out two sources between 20 and 25 miles away, scarcely any distance apart, not above a degree. Then three, then a fourth and fifth, and then a growing redness that didn't move. "There's a ship on fire," said Jack in horror, his heart pumping so hard that he could scarcely keep the steady deep red glow in his object glass. "I hope to God it's not one of ours. I hope to God they drown the magazines." And after a while, the Real Carlos fell on board the Hermenegildo and fired her too. But while they were burning, Keats had pushed on to engage the San Antonio, who hauled her wind and fought back like a rare Pluckton, but she had to strike in half an hour, for do you see, Superb was firing three broadsides to her too and pointing them straight. So Keats took possession of her, and the rest of the squadron chased as hard as ever they could to the north-west in a gale of wind. An enormous flash lit the sky, dazzled them, put out the stars. And nearly 2 minutes later the vast, solemn, long, rumbling boom of explosion reached them, prolonged by its own echo off the African shore. "What was it?" asked Stephen at last. "The ship blew up," said Jack. His mind was filled with the Battle of the Nile and the long moment when Lorient exploded, all brought back to him with extraordinary vividness. 100 details he thought forgotten, some very hideous. And he was still among those memories when a second explosion shattered the darkness, perhaps even greater than the first. After this, nothing. Not the remotest light, not a gun flash. The wind increased steadily, and the rising moon put out the smaller stars. After a while, some of the lanterns began to go down, others remained, and some even climbed higher still. Jack and Stephen stayed where they were. Dawn found them under their rock, with Jack steadily sweeping the gut, calm now and deserted, and Stephen Maturin fast asleep, smiling. Not a word, not a sign. A silent sea, a silent sky, and the wind grown treacherous again. All round the compass. At 7:30, Jack saw Stephen back to the hospital, revived himself with coffee, and climbed again. They very nearly took the Formidable, but she just got into Cadiz, and we very nearly lost the Venerable, dismasted and aground. But they got her off, and she's on her way back now, jury-rigged, with a stunsail boom for a mizzenmast. There's Dalziel and Marshall going by. Ahoy, Dalziel! Ahoy, Marshall! Ahoy there! Come and drink a glass to the victory!
Thank you for watching this video. This engagement was the last of the first book, Master and Commander, so I'll probably take some time to look through the earlier chapters and some of the other books to find a good one for the next video. As always, feel free to leave any suggestions in the comments. And until next time, happy navigating!